Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible.
Welcome to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Hello, everybody. How is it going today? I hope you're having a wonderful day so far. Happy Monday. I cannot believe it's another new week. We get a new opportunity to create the life that we want to live. And I am back sharing more information of how you can live your life to the happiest and the fullest. And today I thought we would talk about something that we all struggle with no matter what. To some degree, we all deal with this a little bit, and that is anxiety. And of course, some people deal with it a little bit more than others, but at one point in our life, we all feel a little bit anxious, a little bit worrisome, just a little bit off. And especially with everything going on in our world, I think that the anxiety levels are higher right now. I know things are fading out a little bit more, but there's still so much uncertainty, and anxiety is such a prominent thing in our world. Everyone, when it comes to simple things like, I shouldn't say simple things, but when it comes to things even like going to take a test, you feel a little bit anxiety. When you see some cop lights behind you, you might feel a bit some anxiety. If you have an important meeting with your boss, you feel a little bit of anxiety. And then of course there's others that feel it to a different extreme. And so today I thought we would talk about anxiety. I'm going to go over the 5 main types of anxiety, but then I'm going to start talking about basically the basic anxiety disorder, so generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. So I'm going to go more into about GAD. We'll talk about, how do you develop GAD? What exactly is it? What are the symptoms of GAD? And then of course we're going to go into some coping mechanisms, things that you can do. We'll talk about treatments. We'll talk about all those things that you need to take care of yourself if you have generalized anxiety disorder. But this is the most generalized anxiety disorder. So even if you just feel anxious sometimes in your life, maybe you don't have GAD, all these tips and tricks will definitely help you as well. This is definitely beneficial for you too. I will do some episodes maybe targeting some of the more specific anxiety disorders, but I thought I would start off with just the generalized anxiety disorder, because all of us have it in our lives. At some point, we all feel a little bit anxious. So I thought it would just be a good topic to talk about today. So let's just jump right in. I'll stop rambling on. So what exactly is anxiety? And how do you know if you have anxiety? Well, like I said, anxiety is just a part of all of our lives. You're getting pulled over by a cop with his lights flashing. You're probably going to feel a little anxious. You're going into an interview or an important meeting. You're going to feel a little bit anxious. It's kind of like when you feel, but just because you feel anxiety in these areas does not mean that you have GAD. And we'll definitely go further into that. But sometimes, like anxiety is just a part of life. Just like sadness is a part of life, that doesn't mean that you have depression if you feel sad, right? So there's kind of, we all deal with certain aspects of generalized anxiety disorder, just like we all deal with aspects of depression and other mental health problems and things like that. So it kind of comes and goes in waves for some people. Others, it's more prominent. So anxiety is just a part of our life. Basically, it's the inability to control the things that we think might hurt us, the things that we cannot control, and we freak out that we cannot control them. And we worry about them. and it's clinical anxiety can make you feel like you're just completely out of control, which causes more anxiety. Isn't it funny how that happens? It's like a little cycle. You're anxious about being anxious. I am the queen of this. Anxious about being anxious, but we all have been there. We all do it. So I'm going to talk about the first 5 main types of anxiety disorders. The first one, generalized anxiety disorder. So that just means it's an anxiety disorder that's characterized by chronic anxiety, exaggerated worry and tension, even when there is a little or nothing to provoke it. So that's the difference between generalized anxiety disorder and someone that just has a little bit of anxiety sometimes. It is excessive. It is over-exaggerated. It's basically constant all the time. Whereas, it's not just when you have cop lights behind you. It's a huge part of your life. Then, of course, there's OCD, so obsessive compulsive disorder. So that's an anxiety disorder, and it's characterized by recurrent unwanted thoughts, so your obsessions, and it could be or repetitive behaviors, so your compulsions, and repetitive behaviors such as like your hand washing, your counting, checking, or cleaning is very common, and this is often just performed with the hope of preventing obsessive thoughts or making them go away. Performing those so-called rituals, as people say. However, it provides only temporary relief, and then you kind of go back into it again and again and again. Okay, and then there's panic disorder. Panic disorder is an anxiety disorder, and it's characterized by an unexpected and repeated episodes of intense fear, accompanied by physical symptoms that may include chest pain, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, dizziness, or abdominal distress. Panic disorder can come with lots of the other anxiety disorders as well. You might feel like you have a little bit of panic disorder if you do have GAD, or if you have OCD, or this next one I'm going to talk about, PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, which is another anxiety disorder that can develop after exposure to a terrifying event or ordeal, in which it basically just engraves physical harm that was occurred or was threatened. And those traumatic events that may trigger PTSD include violent personal assaults, natural or human-caused disasters, accidents, military combat, things like that. Then there's social phobia or social anxiety disorder. This is an anxiety disorder that's characterized by just the overwhelming anxiety and excessive self-consciousness in everyday social situations. So social phobia can be limited to only one type of situation. So it could just be like fear of speaking in front of people or like informal situations. Maybe it's eating or drinking in front of others. And then it could be more severe and maybe really broad that people just don't even like to leave their house because they're so anxious to be out in the world that's not, inside their white walls of their home. So today, let's talk about generalized anxiety disorder. Those are the top 5 main ones, but I'm going to start with generalized anxiety disorder. And like I said, I can definitely get into the other ones if you guys want in some later episodes. I would love to talk about more of them as well because there's just so much information to be shared. And I feel like it's very important for people to be aware about anxiety because it is something that we all have. That means that we're all going to be helping one another deal with anxiety, whether you have GAD or just everyday or just regular anxiety, or maybe you have OCD or PTSD, anything like that. It's really good to be aware of symptoms and triggers and how to help somebody that is going through something like that. So it's very important to realize that, like I said, if you have anxiety, it's just a part of your life, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have GAD. Okay, so don't listen to this and diagnose yourself with GAD just because you feel anxious when you're going for an interview. That is normal, completely normal. But having an actual disorder like GAD, those feelings of anxiety don't go away, and this can cause a huge disruption in everyday activities, not just when you're going for an interview, not just when you have cop lights behind you or you have a meeting with your boss. It is an everyday occurrence. So a lot of people will hold themselves back from doing something because they feel anxious about it. So how do you develop GAD? So like most illnesses, anxiety disorders are a mix that could be passed down from family or because of your environment. Having a family member with clinical anxiety doesn't guarantee you will have it, but it will make you more prone to the trauma that can trigger clinical anxiety. But anxiety has a reason. Anxiety is not a moral weakness or a lack of faith on anything like that makes people struggle. People around those with clinical anxiety sometimes don't realize that. And often, they get the responses as, just don't worry, just chill out, just relax. That's the worst. Just relax, just chill out. And people don't get it that you can't just chill out. You can't just relax. You can't just stop worrying. It is something that is so prominent in your life that you wish you could flip a switch and turn it off, but you can't. It's not that easy. And when people say, oh, well, just don't worry so much, that adds the emotion of shame to the struggle with anxiety that is just so unnecessary, which is why I think it's so important to be talking about these disorders and give people awareness of what they are like, because we can't just brush it off and put shame on people who are dealing with things like this, because it can be so, so difficult to deal with. And everybody deserves to be heard. Everyone deserves to be helped and not feel ashamed for any kind of mental health problem or anything like that. All right, so it is time for a little bit of a break, but when I get back, I'm going to go over some generalized anxiety disorders, some of the symptoms. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll talk a little bit about treatments, and then hold on to the very end of the episode, because I'm going to be giving you my number one tip, how I deal with my anxiety, and the one thing that gets me through my days and really helps me out and gets me have a clear head and all these different things. It is my one thing that I do. I have finally kind of found my one thing that works for me. So don't go anywhere. That's coming up at the very end of the episode, so you don't want to miss that. I promise you, it's changed my life. It could change yours if you also struggle with anxiety. So don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast. I am your host, Alyssa Jo, in case you forgot or in case for some reason you're tuning in at this section of the episode. Hello, my name is Alyssa Jo. We're talking all about generalized anxiety disorder today, how exactly people can develop GAD, what kind of role it plays in your life, and now we're about to talk about the symptoms of GAD so that you can recognize these even within yourself or within somebody else. So some of the main symptoms of GAD would be feeling restless, feeling very wound up or on edge, just a little bit off, being easily fatigued. You get very, very drained, having difficulty concentrating. Your mind just kind of goes blank. You might space out for a while, being very irritable. Comes with a lot of mental health problems. You get very irritable, very annoyed easily, comes with the off edge, and that just, I think it comes with everything, the fatigue and not concentrating. It just makes you irritable. Next one is having muscle tension. People with GAD can have very bad muscle tension that you're just always tensed up because you're always so anxious, right? You're always on edge, waiting for kind of what's going to happen next. And you get all tense. Your body will tense up. Difficulty controlling feelings of your worry, of course, which just means you cannot, your worrying is obsessive. It is over top. And then of course having sleeping problems, so such as difficulty like falling asleep or staying asleep, maybe restlessness, maybe you toss around a lot, or just unsatisfying sleep. You can't really get into your deep sleep. So these are all signs of GAD. But GAD is obviously very generalized. The name says it all. So it's not specific to a certain thing. Like when people have a fear of snakes to the point where they won't leave their house if they're in an area with snakes or something like that. It's not just because they're scared of snakes. It's because they have this serious anxiety over snakes, right? And now think of that as someone having this anxiety for everything. It's not just snakes. It is the world. It is everything you do. It is everywhere. It is so generalized. That's why it's so important to find your triggers and find things that really do affect you, because I think everybody's a little bit different with GAD. Of course, you have the same type of just general anxiety over things, but there are definitely specific triggers for specific people. So when I'm giving you these tips, when I'm talking about all these things, remember that these are very generalized. They can usually help a lot of people, but you might find things that work better for you or don't work for you. And it's a lot of trying and it's a lot of trial and error, really, I think, when it comes to finding your coping mechanisms for anxiety. You just have to keep trying. It gets frustrating, but you will get there. You will find what works for you. Just like I said at the end of the episode, I'm going to share with you the one thing that works for me, that's really helped change my life with my anxiety. So now let's talk about treatments. General anxiety disorder can just mean so many different things, right? Maybe multiple things make you anxious. Maybe it's just completely life itself that makes you anxious. Your head is always spinning. Some worry is basically always happening. So now if you go to your doctor to get a diagnosis, your doctor usually will do a physical exam and look for signs that maybe your anxiety might be linked to other medications or underlying health problems. This is very, very common that sometimes you develop GAD for other reasons. Maybe it's medications you're on. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe you're going through a very traumatic time in your life. Maybe you're going through something. That's when a lot of people will develop panic disorder, when you're going through a really hard time. But a lot of people will develop GAD as well, just because of the stage of their life that they're in, and it's causing them so much anxiety in so many different areas. So it's just if you have already been diagnosed with depression, some anxiety usually comes along with that as well. But other health conditions can also cause anxiety. It's not just depression. There's so many other things that can contribute to you developing GAD. And remember, if you are diagnosed with GAD, it could be just that stage in your life, like I said, especially if you haven't felt too much anxiety in your life before, and then you went through something and you're feeling anxious all of a sudden 24/7. It is probably because that event. So go to your doctor, ask what you can do, find your coping mechanisms, because you develop that because of an event, basically, probably. So you just have to kind of be aware of yourself. And I think the main thing to tell you is to try to look inward and try to find where the underlying problem is, because the doctors can give you treatments. You can try to find coping mechanisms. You can do all these different things. You can get help. You can talk to somebody. You can squeeze a stress ball to your knuckles bleed. But if you do not find out your underlying problem, why you have anxiety, what is causing your anxiety, it will never go away. You will never feel fully better. So you always have to look inward and find something within yourself of why is this happening. And I think self-reflection helps a lot with this. Grab your journal, start writing, and start to try to just flush out maybe why you're feeling this anxious way. This is just a coping mechanism that I do very often when I feel anxious. I will take just my journal or a piece of paper. I always grab a pencil and I will put columns. And so I'll say, one column will say what's making me feel anxious. What are my anxious thoughts? And so I'll go down a list and write down what's making me anxious. Be very, very specific as you can be. Remember, it's your journal. It's your piece of paper. No one else has to read it. So be very specific of exactly what is making you feel anxious or the way that you are feeling in one column. And then on the next column, right beside it, try to write your rational thought. So it's pretty much your irrational, over-worrisome thought to a rational thought. And then the next column would be your action of how to transform to that rational thought if you can do so. So it's usually, I do a 3-column basis of my journal, and what's making me anxious, that irrational thought, the rational thought, and then an action that I can take to get me to that rational thought or to help me get me there. So that is my tip for self-reflection. This really also just kind of figures out where your triggers are coming from, which is so, so important. But that is not my main tip yet. That's still coming at the end of the episode. So let's talk about treatment now. The most common and helpful thing that a doctor will tell you is to go to therapy. Talking to someone out loud about your anxieties helps a lot. Someone who is very anxious, you have a lot on your mind. There's always something going on. That's why you have troubles sleeping or troubles concentrating. Even if you go blank, doesn't mean your brain is blank. It might mean that you're overloading. Your brain is always on, always moving, and it's really hard to stay concentrated or, to not stress about little things. So letting those things out, talking about it, that's not just in your journal, talking about it out loud to a professional does absolute wonders. So go talk to somebody. That is probably the most helpful and first thing that your doctor will tell you to do. Just talking to someone can give this relief of tension, and it's not just even, in your mind, but in your body. If you struggle with that muscle tension from anxiety, talking to somebody will help relieve that because you're lifting off that negative energy. You're letting it go, and you're letting yourself breathe and relax and taking those deep breaths. So also, generally, a short-term treatment would be cognitive behavioral therapy, which focuses on teaching you specific skills, of course, to directly manage your worries and help you gradually return to the activities you've avoided because of your anxiety. So through this process, your symptoms improve as you build on your initial success. This is where I think my 3-column self-reflection helps me. I can see my progress a little bit, and it just helps me in the day, in that moment, to really figure out what I'm feeling and what my rational thought is. And then I'll catch myself, and the next time I do it, I don't write as many irrational thoughts, and the rational thoughts come easier, or maybe the action comes easier. So you see growth within yourself. Then your doctor may actually prescribe you medication if it comes to that. But all of the treatment options depend, of course, of how severe your anxiety is and what exactly you are going through. A lot of the time when someone has anxiety, especially GAD, they can develop other forms of anxiety. So the most common thing that people have or they develop is obsessive compulsive disorder, so OCD. So it is time for a little bit of a break, but I'm going to get into why a lot of people will develop OCD if they already have GAD. And then I'm going to go into some coping mechanisms for general anxiety. And then, of course, I'm going to finish off with my one thing that has helped my anxiety. It has been a day and night change. So don't go anywhere. I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast. All right, we're on the last stretch of today's episode. In case for another weird reason you're just tuning in now or you forgot, my name is Alyssa Jo, and we're talking all about generalized anxiety disorder. So I left you on a little bit of a cliffhanger there. Why would people develop OCD if you already have GAD? And basically, this is the way that most people bring control into their life. So with generalized anxiety disorder, you feel very out of control. Everything is stressful. Everything is worrisome. Everything, you're on edge a little bit. You just, no matter what, you're feeling a little bit off or a little bit anxious. And so you feel out of control. And that is not a fun feeling, to feel out of control. We've all been there. We've all felt uncontrolled in some scenario in our life. So a lot of people with GAD will develop OCD because this is a way that they can control something. So when you're anxious, you feel so out of control, and it feels like many of your aspects of your life are just so far gone, you have no grip on them whatsoever. So then you develop OCD, where you are obsessive with cleaning, or maybe you're obsessive with counting things, or, anything like that. This is your way to control something in your life. So washing your hands, cleaning, anything like that. And this is it's going to make you feel like you're in control of some aspect of your life. But then OCD can start to take over as well. So then you're having a problem, because you got OCD and GAD, and it's, that's when it can become very dangerous. It can become very obsessive with trying to control and not control things. And then when you have OCD, you really just want to control everything. And with GAD, you can't control everything. You feel so out of control. So these things almost clash. They almost help each other at the same time. It's kind of interesting, but a lot of people with GAD will develop OCD as well. Okay, now let's talk about some coping mechanisms for GAD. So I did mention therapy, self-reflection. I always mention self-reflection, my little 3 columns. That's how I deal with my anxiety, self-reflection. But what else can you do? So keeping physically active, developing that routine that you're physically active most days of the week. This is one of the most powerful things that you can do when you have anxiety. This is probably my second tip that I could give you. Like my main thing that I do to take care of myself is making sure that I'm getting physical activity, because if I find that if I don't work out during my day, even just going for a walk or get some kind of movement, I have a million times more anxiety or anxious thoughts or irrational thoughts than I would have if I just let some of that out at the gym. That's how I function. A lot of people, this works. Go for a walk. It clears your head. You don't have to go lift heavy weights or do a huge workout, but keeping physically active is so, so important. And if you can develop a routine where you're just physically active every single day, maybe you have a morning routine, you wake up, you go for a run, and that's how you start your day. I don't think that exercise really has, I don't think the timing of when you exercise matters too much to some people. For me, it does. I work best if I exercise in the morning. I find that I'm way less anxious all day long, just because I get that workout. I get that last little thing out of me, some anxious thoughts out of me, and I kind of just start my day with a more clear head. But then other days too, at the end of my day, I need to work out because I had a tough day or was going through something or just felt really anxious all day. Then sometimes that night workout helps immensely as well. So kind of figuring out what works for you. All these coping mechanisms need to be tailored to you specifically and what's going to help you. All right, so next one is making sleep a priority. I think this is just said so often, but it's not practiced enough, and I'm guilty of this as well. Sleep is not always my priority, and I need to make sure that I'm getting enough sleep because it does help with your anxiety so much. When you're very, very tired, you're going to be more anxious. When you are hungover, if you've ever been hungover and you felt really anxious, I could do a whole episode on hangover anxiety, but a thing that plays a role in that is how tired you are. Your body did not get rested. The next one is, of course, eat healthy. So focusing on vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fish, this all may be linked to reducing anxiety. There is some research on it, but more research is coming that comes with avoiding alcohol and recreational drugs as well. These substances worsen anxiety. Just like that. That's all I'm going to say. Quit smoking, cut back or quit drinking coffee if you can. Nicotine and caffeine can worsen anxiety. For me, I love my caffeine, and sometimes when I don't have my caffeine, I feel more anxious. So once again, you got to tailor these things to you, your body, your mind, what is going to work for you. And remember that these things can change over the course of your life. Like, the coping mechanisms that work for you now might not work for you in 2 years or work for you in 6 months even. So everything's kind of changing. That's why you really got to get to know yourself. You always need to remember, just don't feel ashamed. Having anxiety is a part of everyday life. Unfortunately, some people experience it more intensely than others, but there's nothing to be ashamed of. You got to take care of yourself. So my next one is practicing mindfulness. By slowing down, we're really learning to be present rather than hyper-focused or trying to anticipate or prepare for the future, which is what a lot of people with GAD do. You're always thinking, what is my next step, or what is my next 10 steps? So our anxiety, like when you just slow down, you live in the present moment, your anxiety will be reduced. And then I want to say practice acceptance and self-compassion. Just like you shouldn't be ashamed, you also should be practicing acceptance. If you can accept yourself for the way that you are and your anxiety, it makes it a lot easier to get to know the things that you need to do to cope with these things. Always practice self-compassion, because it's not easy having anxiety disorder, and you have to be kind to yourself, because that can go a long way with the way that you cope with things. So always remember to practice acceptance and self-compassion. And now we have made it to my one biggest tip that I do, or that has helped me with my anxiety. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but learning your triggers. And specifically, I keep an anxiety journal. I talk a lot about journaling, but I have a specific anxiety journal that has helped me figure out my triggers, that has helped me track my progress, that has helped me kind of figure out my coping mechanisms and the way that I handle situations. I am still in the process of this. This is something that I have started, I shouldn't say recently, but somewhat recently, but it has changed my life in the months that I have done it. So finding out your triggers is so important, because it can be so difficult for people to do so with GAD, because you just feel everything makes you anxious. And so finding those triggers that really, really affect you is so important. So self-reflection and really understanding the way that you feel at certain times can help you with this. So keep your anxiety journal. I carry one in my purse or my backpack at all times. So when I feel anxious, this is what I do. I pull up when I'm feeling anxious or thought, if I'm not doing my 3 columns or something like that, I will pull up my anxiety journal and I will write exactly what I am doing in that moment. I will write where I am, what the situation is, and how I'm feeling. And I mean specific things. Am I sweating? Is my heart racing? How is my breathing? Who am I surrounded by? What is my environment? What time of the day is it? What day is it? What day of the week is it? The more specific that you can get with your anxiety journal and is going to make it so much easier to figure out your triggers. I will write the time, the date, of course. And when you keep this anxiety journal and you start doing it and consistently, and you remind yourself to do it, like you grab your journal, that becomes a habit for you. Over a course of a few months or even weeks, you'll be able to see your progress. You'll be able to see connections, what your triggers are. Maybe it's a certain time of the day. Maybe when you're surrounded around certain people. Maybe it's when you're in a certain environment. Maybe it's on Mondays you feel extra anxious. I don't know what it is, but you will find connections through your anxiety journal. This has made such a huge difference for me, because it's literally just tracking your own progress, and it kind of sounds daunting and annoying at a time. It's like, I'm already anxious, now I have to write all these things down. Trust me, it just makes such a difference in long term when you're able to connect these dots, because then you can avoid those things that trigger you. So let's say you get really, really anxious on Monday mornings because you have a team meeting at this certain time. Okay, maybe you can avoid that, but maybe there's things now that you can do on Monday mornings that can bring you better peace. So maybe you make sure that you do go to the gym on Monday mornings before that meeting so that you release some of that anxiety out of you or some of that tension, and you're able just to focus on that meeting with less worries or anxious thoughts. So that is my biggest tip. That is something that has changed my life over the past few months now, and I hope that you will implement that into your life and that it can change you as well, because I have to admit, I love tracking my progress and seeing it and connecting those dots so that I can completely live my life better and happier and not be bottled down by my worries. All right, well, that is all of the information that I have for you today about generalized anxiety disorder. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I know it was very basic. It was very generalized, of course. So like I said, I will definitely do some more episodes pinpointing certain anxiety disorders like OCD and PTSD and all these different ones, panic disorder. I would love to talk to you guys about that because, like I said, bringing more awareness, the better. So thank you so much for listening to GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alyssa Jo. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button. I have new episodes out every Monday and Thursday. Go over to our social media, follow and like. I update those regularly. We got Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I love posting on them. I love interacting with you. You want to chat, if you have a question, anything like that, shoot me a message. I would love to chat with you. And then, of course, as always, please do not forget to leave a 5-star review. It helps me out a ton, and I love reading the reviews. It makes me feel so good inside. So thank you so much. Remember to stay positive, stay happy, and take deep breaths, because anxiety is in everybody's life and you're gonna be okay. Till next time, thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find the show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows. From the GSMC Podcast Network, from sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Life and Happiness Podcast.